Welcome to the Trust Factor Radio, bringing you interviews and insights to unlock the power of the subconscious mind to create authority, credibility, and trust. With your host, the Authority Architect and best-selling author, Neil Howe.
Hello, welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today's guest is attorney Richard Symmes. He's the owner of Symmes Law Group, PLLC in Seattle, Washington, and he helps individuals and small businesses gain financial debt relief through bankruptcy, debt settlement, and loan modifications. He is one of the highest rated attorneys online, delivering a personal service in the Seattle area, and has appeared on 1150 AM, KKNW, KOMO News, US News and World Report, as well as Credit Karma. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about in a short space of time now. We are right in the middle of this coronavirus, COVID-19 crisis, pandemic that is affecting the nation right now to date this show. But, we want to talk about some of the things that people can do to relieve some of that financial burden that they might be facing, not only now, but in the future as well. And obviously bankruptcy is one of the options that they have. So before we get really into that, tell me who it is that you really serve, Richard, in the Seattle area.
Well, most of my clients are individuals or small business owners dealing with financial issues, either business through their businesses or individually. Obviously, now people are being hit by this virus, and we're kind of in the unknown right now with people with lack of income or not being able to operate their business. So I'm just trying to provide options, like I always do. Moving forward as we go through this.
Yeah, obviously Washington was like a kind of a hotbed, I suppose, of some of the first cases in the US, mostly in a nursing home, if I believe correctly. But, this is a financial event that is going to affect the whole world, at least not the United States and, our states and local areas individually. What do you see the problems that people are having right now, and what do you see happening in the next kind of couple of months to a year down the road?
Well, at this point, we're right at the beginning of everything. People are just trying to figure out how they're going to move forward, how they're going to deal with it. Perhaps they've been laid off. Perhaps they have a business that can no longer operate. So how are they going to pay the bills? And then that trickles down to maybe landlords who aren't getting paid rent, to all kinds of vendors not getting paid. So the trickle down effects of what is happening from a whole nationwide shutdown essentially is something that could last for years moving forward. But we don't know how the government's going to react so far. But there's been a couple of ideas thrown out there, like paying individuals and businesses, payments, having low interest loans available for businesses to continue to operate. But it's going to be a struggle moving forward through this. But, I believe we'll recover at the end of the day. It's just going to take some time and provide people with the right options to get out of it, if they've been affected.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the proposals from the government and the stimulus package, reaching up to $2 trillion. It's kind of scary how a virus like this has been able to, almost take the country to its knees, but we will find a way back. How do you think the stimulus, the idea of paying, individuals money from the government is going to work?
Well, I think it'll help in the short term, but the question is, in the long term, one check isn't going to do it if people aren't able to operate their business or go back to work at those businesses moving forward. So unless there's a way these businesses are adapting, or the nation as a whole is able to adapt and still provide those jobs, unless they plan to continue with the support payments, I just don't see how, that's going to help things in the long term. It's more of a short-term solution. And, the same with these low interest business loans. Again, it's, in the short term, unless they're allowed to write them off in the future, businesses are still going to have to pay those back, and they're going to need income to do that. So from what I'm seeing right now, I think there's going to be a pretty high unemployment rate, and until these businesses start operating, which, if we did it before, we should be able to get back to where we were, but there's going to be a lot of debt incurred by people and businesses in this short period that businesses aren't able to operate.
And of course, these small businesses are, what makes America run. We rely on the restaurants and the gyms, and, there's so many other service-based businesses that, employ so many people. Which businesses do you think are really being hurt right now?
Well, everybody hears about the restaurants. They're not able to operate, but it really is any business that has people gathering in a place, retail shops. I'm getting calls from people every day. I think I had somebody who sells cars. Real estate agents aren't able to do open houses right now, so maybe the housing market will be affected. Pretty much any business that does not normally operate online or requires people to come into the business. So it's retail and shops are probably going to be hit the hardest.
Yeah, so there's, the immediate effect of this. Obviously, people have stopped having an income and they need to get money in their pockets right away. But, the longer term effects are going to, we're looking at, I know some of the problems that you help your clients solve are, stopping foreclosures. Do you envisage a lot of foreclosures coming down the line?
Well, that's another thing the government has stepped in to help with, where federally backed loans, they're putting, I believe it was a 60-day moratorium on foreclosures. And then that they're encouraging other major banks to do that as well. Such, I think there was an announcement from Bank of America saying they were going to do it. So again, in the short term, that's going to help. But the question is, how is that going to affect people in the long run? Are they going to modify all the loans, to just tack on the missed payments to the back of the loan? Are people going to have to pay them, starting in 60 days? We just don't know. But I imagine, at least on my end, there might be a lot of Chapter 13 bankruptcy filings, where when people are able to get their jobs back or start their businesses again, they're going to need some sort of tool to make up the arrears that they're behind. And during this time, they might have incurred a lot of credit card debt as well. So even if they're able to earn a good income, they might need a tool that allows them to make up past payments that they've occurred during this time.
Mm-hmm. So explain a little bit more about the Chapter 13 and how that's going to be helpful to them.
Well, a Chapter 13 is a personal reorganization. So it lets people make up payments that they're behind over a period of 3 to 5 years. Some people have to pay back all their debts. Some people have to pay very little. It's really dependent on a person's assets, their family size, and their income, as opposed to, say, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, where you would just wipe out the debt if you qualify, based on your income and, again, your household size and whether you have any assets that are at risk of being lost, would decide whether you would be a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, most likely.
So I know that is a problem. People are scared of losing cars or houses. What can you do to help them prevent that from happening?
Well, most people keep their vehicles when they file bankruptcy. Every state has their own exemption rules, and their exemptions are rules that allow people to retain property up to a certain amount. And so, for instance, where I am in Washington State, we can opt to use the federal exemptions or the Washington State exemptions. And if somebody owns a home, for example, they can protect up to $125,000 of equity in their home. But if they have more than that, they might be at risk of losing the home, and then Chapter 7 would not make for a good plan if they don't want to lose their home. So at that point, we would have to look at whether Chapter 13 makes sense, or whether, debt settlement, or getting some sort of home equity loan to repay debts, or loan modification, just other options that might be available outside of bankruptcy.
Mm. And from a business standpoint, what kind of help is available to them?
Well, in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it's available to businesses, but usually it's not a good idea to file a Chapter 7 for a business, because a business does not receive a bankruptcy discharge. So the only point of doing a Chapter 7 would be to liquidate the business assets. And also in Washington State, it helps to make sure some Washington State taxes are not assessed against the individual owners. But when you hear of a business bankruptcy and it's a business you want to keep running, usually that refers to a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And that, again, works like a Chapter 13, but is more of a reorganization of debt to allow you to pay the debts over time.
So for business owners who are struggling right now, and maybe they have had to close their business, what kind of help are they going to be able to get from the government, maybe, in order to, restart and get back up to where they were?
Well, what we're seeing so far is the low interest loans. I think they're still a little bit above 3% is what they're offering to businesses right now to get them through this difficult period. And so those loans could be used to pay employees, to pay rent on the business, and make sure the business is still there, when this is all over. But again, we don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know if the government is just going to write off those loans at a later date. Right now, I haven't seen anything that said that, but I was listening to something where they said, if they use the money to pay employees and whatnot, they might be able to write it off later, but I think that's still getting hashed out by Congress right now.
Yeah, they're still trying to push that through. Everybody hopes that they will do it as soon as possible so that there's a little bit of certainty in what might happen in the future. But like you said, we are right in the middle of it. Talking about some of the employees that have been laid off, they will be incurring a lot of bills, and people might be after their debt when they finally get back to work. What kind of relief is available to them? I know one of the problems that you help solve is wage garnishments as well.
Right. So that's usually where a Chapter 7 bankruptcy would make the most sense, where they could file a bankruptcy and it will discharge the debts that they've incurred during this time moving forward. And like I said, most people get to keep all their assets, their debt, as long as they're not worth a significant amount moving forward. And so that is probably the best option if they qualify. And people always want to know, what are the negative aspects of bankruptcy? And typically, the positives outweigh the negatives. Yes, it does go on your credit, and it can stay there for up to 10 years. But most people incurring debt, by filing the bankruptcy, their credit scores aren't very good to begin with. And after they file, the credit scores actually go up because they wipe out all the debt that was on the credit report before. So for most people, it's a positive, and that's probably the best way to go would be Chapter 7. If they don't have a major asset they might be at risk of losing.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about some of the debts that they might have on their credit report, and that's all wiped out, and then they only have one thing, which is the bankruptcy, but that's how the score goes up. Let's talk about unemployment. There's been thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, or even millions by the end of this, people applying for unemployment. How do you see that affecting the overall state of the country?
Well, I mean, the natural effect, for people is to hold on as long as they can, to pay their debts. And they're going to try to do that by getting unemployment and, probably try to shore up things once they're back to work if they can. But, I think it's a good thing if people can pay their rent, which the landlord will get, and then they can pay their mortgages and, really affect, rather than having something more catastrophic if nobody's getting paid anything and can't pay their bills. So I think the fact that the government is being aggressive in trying to provide funds to individuals and businesses is the right move to try to keep things moving forward. And whatever the fallout is from that, the government can deal with it at a later date once we get through this.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of long-term effects that we really just haven't thought about yet that we will encounter down the line. And obviously, somebody like yourself, Richard, is going to be there to help with these financial problems that people are having. Let's talk about student loans for a minute. Are they still expected to be paying those loans at this time?
I would say yes, if you can. But however, the government did announce that they're going to waive the interest for the next 60 days, I believe it was. So they'll pay 0% on that. But if people are not on some sort of income-based repayment right now, they should probably contact their servicer in order to get on those types of plans and also request the waiver of the interest. In general, student loans are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. There are certain circumstances where people can discharge their student loans, but it requires filing an adversary case against the lender in order to try to do that. So, and there's also a several factor test to get out of student loans. And, with the presidential election coming up, maybe this will be a time for government to revisit the bankruptcy laws as they apply to student loans moving forward. Before 2005, it was much easier to discharge student loans. And when the laws changed, they made it very difficult. So with all this accruing debt, maybe they will revisit those laws moving forward, and we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are going to change in the future. We will see different businesses start up. We're going to see a lot of businesses fail. How do you see things being different going forward?
Well, I mean, like I said, I see people trying to hang on as long as they can. I don't think it'll be like an immediate flow of people bankruptcy, probably a steady trickle. And then a couple of months down the line, once people start missing payments and trying to figure out, the pieces here, pick up the pieces, I think that's when, at least on the bankruptcy end, filings will really start to increase. But I do agree with you. I think now's the time new businesses are going to start, and businesses that just can't operate, those are the ones that are going to be the most heavily hit, and they're going to have to shut down. It's kind of like the last recession with like real estate investors or developers, got stuck holding the bag. And a lot of those people had to file bankruptcy because they were the most heavily hit, and they didn't have a whole lot of other options when they had all these properties that were just underwater. And the same thing is happening this time, except instead of real estate, it's just businesses that can't operate in general. So they're left having these businesses and assets that are, basically worthless if they can't run the business, and they owe a lot of money. So I see filings definitely going up in the future as far as those types of businesses go.
Yeah, and you look at some of the things that are happening now. We're seeing schools closed across the nation. Businesses are closed, and people are working from home. Really will be interesting to see, I think, how dealing with this circumstance is going to make an impact on the way schooling, business, and everything else in life is done going forward. I think there's been a major push to, hey, guess what? We can do a lot of these things online without having to, spend the time at the office or drive into the office for many people as well. It'll be really interesting to see how this does change the whole economy.
Exactly. And so from that standpoint, the bankruptcy laws, I always thought they were kind of outdated, and the way they do that, because they make everyone come to court, show their IDs, and if you couldn't make it to court, you can't file bankruptcy. So now they've filed some emergency orders where they're allowing people to appear telephonically. We haven't done the video conference yet, but now I'm doing my first video court hearing this week, where people can stay home and everybody calls into a line and they just take each case one at a time over the phone. And so I'm thinking, why couldn't we just do that before? At least in Seattle, people hate coming downtown. The traffic's really bad. You got all the tech companies there. And now it's basically a ghost town, but people just hated coming downtown in general. So a lot of people like doing it this way. And also under the bankruptcy laws, it was a requirement to have what they call wet signatures, where people had to actually physically sign the documents. And so perhaps this, what we're going through right now, will have them amend the bankruptcy laws. I know they're doing it in some jurisdictions already, where they're allowing digital signatures, and then also the telephone conferences, which helps people not have to come into court. And I don't see why this can continue in the future once we're through this.
And as far as people who have been going through bankruptcy, they're in the middle of it, and new filings, are you still dealing with new filings coming in right now?
Yeah, so that's, the cases I filed before, like I said, those are getting converted over to phone hearings. And then the new cases, everything's filed online by attorneys. So I don't know how the court is doing it, if people are coming in or if they switch to online as well. But the court seems to be handling it just fine through their online system that we were already using. And so I don't see there being a problem with that. It seems to be business as usual.
Well, what I do know is there's going to be business in the future. I know bankruptcy is something that people don't like to go through. It's a little uneasy for them. At what point do they really have to take a look and say, I need help, I need to file bankruptcy, or I need some kind of solution to my financial problems?
I would say, like you said, nobody wants to do it, but at some point you have to cut your losses. And if you're somebody who's starting to dip into retirement savings, just letting you know those are protected in a bankruptcy. So if you were to, go through all your savings and then file, that seems to be not the best way to handle it when you could have kept all those funds and just filed bankruptcy. So I would say, if you don't have a solution for the financial problems moving forward, or you're just able to pay the minimum payments every month, you're not actually moving yourself forward. You're not getting relief. That's not the way, to live. So if you reasonably can't see yourself getting out of the financial circumstances, and you're starting to dip into your savings, I would say that would be the time to start considering bankruptcy.
Right. There can be that downward spiral to where, you make minimum payments, but you're just still going further and further down. You're just delaying the inevitable, I guess. Better to do it sooner rather than later.
Right. I mean, if some of those interest rates are like 20% on credit cards, and you're just paying the minimum, you're actually getting in more debt every month while, making those payments.
So, Richard, give us a little bit more about your background. How did you get into bankruptcy? What made it your choice for a career?
Well, I never took a class in bankruptcy in law school. I graduated during the last recession, so 2008, and I ended up having a job representing real estate brokers in insurance defense claims. And that job lasted a few months. And due to the recession that hit real estate the hardest, I was laid off. And then I had a friend of mine started a bankruptcy law firm, and this was in Denver. And I just learned from him for about a year while he was running his business, working with him. And then eventually I just set up my own practice in my home of Seattle. And about a year later, and I've been doing it ever since. And I kind of like it. Just, it's more transactional. It does have some litigation aspects, but for the most part, I can predict what's going to happen in a case, get more control, help a lot of people. And it is more transactional than litigation, which is my preference. And so I've just been doing it ever since about 2009, actually, in the bankruptcy field. So, so far, so good. And just going to keep continuing. So I was part of the last downturn, saw how that went. Bankruptcy filings did ease up a little bit over the last couple of years, but like we talked about, it should head back up here in the next few months, I would expect.
Well, it's certainly going to be a busy time for you. I know a lot of people out there are going to be struggling. They're going to have questions, and obviously you're in a position to help them get relief from their financial stresses. Richard, if somebody who does want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way is to head to my website at bankruptcy-law-seattle.com, or they could shoot me an email, richard@symmesslaw.com, or give me a call, 206-682-7975.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you jumping on with me here today and talking about this. Obviously, there's things that are still uncertain in the media. We're, finding different news every day. But a bankruptcy attorney like yourself is going to stay on top of these things, and you're going to know what best route to take for your client. So I appreciate the work that you do, and thank you very much for being my guest on the Trust Factor Radio today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button, share, and we will see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to the Trust Factor Radio with Neil Howe. To learn about the resources mentioned in the show and to listen to past episodes, go to thetrustfactorradio.com. To get a copy of the book, The Trust Factor, go to thetrustfactorbook.com. If you are ready to act now and build your authority, credibility, and trust, schedule a consultation with Neil at theauthorityarchitect.com.